Welcome back to the 127 Fit podcast. Today's guest is the owner of Team Loco Fit. She is also an IFBB Bikini Pro. She also has her master's degree in exercise science. Today's guest is Laurin Conlin. Laurin, I want to welcome you to the 127 Fit podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
For sure. So Laurin, we're just going to jump right into things. I've got 4 questions that I like to ask all of my guests. I call them the warm-up questions just to kind of get the conversational ball rolling, so to speak. The first question that I have for you is, how do you start your day? Do you have a specific routine or ritual you like to stick to on most mornings?
So I don't have probably the best answer here. I know some people are going to have these crazy morning routines. One thing that I always take care of is my skin. Skincare is number one. So that's non-negotiable for me, which I think is kind of standard though. I don't even know if that's considered a routine, but every morning that's happening. So I'm always going to take care, do all my skincare products. I usually take a colder shower. That's kind of how I like to wake up. And then outside of that, if I were to say, what is my perfect morning? It would definitely involve, reading and having some coffee and just kind of being to myself for a few minutes. Does that always happen? Sometimes it doesn't, right? I find that for me, doing things in the morning, I don't, social media is a whole hard thing for me to do. And that part of my brain to write things that are intelligent and in depth, it doesn't happen if it doesn't happen in the morning, right? So for me, I don't want to do that. But as far as a productive morning, if I can knock out a few things, get some sunlight exposure, maybe go for a short walk, something like that. It's pretty brutal right now. I live in Florida, so going outside anytime is awful. But if I can do those things in the morning, wake up, cold shower, go for a walk, read a little bit, maybe meditate, do some breath work, which I'm not good at either, but if I can do it, I feel a little accomplished with doing it. So yeah, I don't really have much of a morning routine. I find that I was, reading other people's stuff and getting very overwhelmed. So I was I just do these few key things. If I can get sunlight exposure and I can get some of the cold exposure from the shower, then I'm all right, at least physiologically, I'm in a good place, and now we'll start the day.
Excellent. Now I want to touch on, because you're out of all the podcast guests I've had on, you're the first individual. Maybe other people have a skincare routine in general or specifically in the morning, but nobody's ever brought it up. So especially for the ladies that are going to be listening to this, I think it's cool because I've had a lot of podcast guests and done a lot of episodes on the podcast, and you're the first one that's brought this up. So I want to dig into that a little bit. Just talk to me, because I really have no clue what that looks like. So talk to me about that. Share a little bit about what that might look like for you, and why do you do it? Why is skincare so important for maybe everybody, but you specifically?
So, skincare could be important for everyone, in my opinion, but I, it's just something that makes me feel very confident. I can, come on camera now without makeup and not feel oh, I have to be wearing something, right? And now I still love makeup. It's not that. It's just, I think any girl listening, it's kind of sometimes hard for guys to understand, but for girls listening, you may have struggled with this before, not feeling yourself without makeup, right? Especially if you're always wearing it. So it's really cool now that I have invested in certain products, medical grade products, which are very different. And so now I feel my skin is much better. So I typically have this, just a light cleanser that I use, and some kind of serum for hydration. And then I have my little light on my desk, or my counter. So I'm getting the light and, whatever, brush my teeth, the whole thing. And then I put on a tinted moisturizer. So it's nothing crazy, but it's something that I'm doing this and it sets my day off in the right tone. And of course, it's going to help, how I look. But it really is just one of those things that if you're what's the morning routine? I'm always gonna take a shower, I'm always gonna wash my face. At least we got that going for me. But yeah, I use a lot of medical grade products, and I can send you the links, you can put in the show notes. It's from one of my friends. She's a she's a board certified aesthetic nurse practitioner. So she's super legit. And the thing with medical grade products is they're just very different versus, over the counter stuff. So I've noticed a big difference. A lot of people have as well. So I have a morning routine and a night routine just for my skin. And yeah, that's
cool.
Nobody probably mentions it because it's like, duh, of course you wash your face. But maybe that's probably why I'm the only person who's ever mentioned it.
I think it's cool. And that's why I love the podcast, conversation so much. Cause like, there's just, I don't know, different people talk about different things and then it goes in different directions, and it's a great way to learn. Now, just really quick before we move on from the skincare part of it. Now, like you're talking about like the pharmaceutical grade, like skincare products and stuff like that. I'm assuming you do that just for the simple fact, like the cheaper stuff that you're going to get at some of the bigger stores and stuff, like it's so full of chemicals. Is that kind of like the impetus behind the pharmaceutical grade?
I would say more medical grade, because I don't know what the difference. I'll be honest, I don't think there is really like pharmaceutical grade skincare, but basically this is stuff that can only be sold through like doctors or office, like medical grade spas, like, right, like because the amount of the product in there can't be sold on the shelves just by anybody is kind of more of what it is. But the thing with the stuff on the shelves is that it's not that it's all bad, right? Like there's of course some drugstore stuff that I use as well. But you're using a lot of it to get, especially for certain things. Like if you're doing like an exfoliating like acid, right? You're really not going to be able to get that in an over-the-counter product to actually do substantial changes to your skin. Or if you are using like a serum, there might be like a lot of junk in it and not really like the actual properties that you want from that serum, like like a peptide serum. It might be 1% instead of like 20%, right? Because you just can't sell that. There are some just like really basic drugstore things that I would use, but those are just the very like basic, like nothing in them, that kind of a thing. So I think it just depends on the product that you're trying to use. But for a lot of products to see like substantial skin changes, whether that's like resurfacing or color, or just hydration, like it's going to make more sense to do that. And they are more expensive up front, but honestly, the stuff lasts really long because you only have to use a little bit of it. So it kind of works out in the long run. There's been so many cheap products that I've tried, and then you just try them and you're like, this is not doing anything. So you just either like don't use it or you throw it out and you're wasting that money anyway. And the product is just like, why would you waste that? So yeah.
Cool. All right. Very thorough. I appreciate that, Laurin. All right. So the second question in regards to the warm-up questions, do you have a favorite quote, mantra, or word?
Yeah, so I don't know where I saw this or whatever, but Jordan Peterson, I love his stuff. If you guys have heard of him, but he said something one time. He said, "You're not everything you could be, and you know it." And he's very big, if you know about Peterson, about like personal responsibility and like looking inwards and things of that nature. And it just really struck me as like, damn, like you're right. Like the only person who really knows who's living up to what you could be doing is you. And you can convince yourself otherwise. But if you actually like peel back those layers and like recognize what you are doing and what you're not doing, it's pretty clear
for sure
what you could be and where you're not. So I just always love that, because it's very like to the point. It's like, damn, right in the fields. Right in the fields, Jordan.
is now that quote by Jordan Peterson, did that come kind of into your being or into your life like at a pivotal point, or like when did that kind of come into your being, and then like how did that kind of affect you, or kind of spark something inside of you to make some adjustments or changes in your life, if at all?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember if like that exactly, but I'll just talk about, I guess, his work, I guess, in general, maybe. So if I had found his stuff maybe like a few years prior, I probably wouldn't have really resonated that much with it or really even understood it. I think it's something that does require like a certain level of maturity that like maybe I didn't have then, like an intellectual maturity and also just like a life maturity. And I think because, one thing that I like about him is that he's very, I don't want to say he brings up very negative things, which I actually appreciate. I feel like a lot of people in the psychology world can always be focusing on like the fluff and like the this and that, and he's just always like very honest and like he's talking about like pulling lessons from like Stalin's era of like communism, and like then like looking like diving into like Nietzsche's work, and you're like, wow, like this is so like well-rounded and like there's like a lot of depth to it. And there's also a lot of like, there are these bad things in life, like there are these like bad people, bad events, like you're one of them. And all, like, it makes you look very inward. And I think that if I had, maybe seen that or heard his stuff like a few years before, it would have been like, okay, cool. But as I've gotten older, I really, really appreciate that. And I really appreciate kind of that, like, more of like the Jungian archetype of like the shadow and all of that. Like, I really have appreciated those types of things that I've learned. Whereas maybe I wouldn't have earlier in my life. And I've definitely had more of a pull in general just to like learning more about psychology and learning more about psychoanalysts and those types of things as the years have gone on, where I didn't even think about that earlier on, like it just was, I took a psych class. Okay, cool. Like everybody does. Like that wasn't even like on my radar. So I can't remember exactly when I heard that quote, but just his work in general has been very impactful and opened my eyes, not just to his work, but to other people's works, who he's highlighted, and been able to kind of dive into that world and just learn more about it.
Awesome. All right. So just to kind of, well, we got two more questions here within the warm-up questions. Is there, and for these next couple questions, Laurin, if there's more than one, please feel free to share, but is there a book or podcast that has been especially impactful in your life?
Yeah. So the book Extreme Ownership, which I know we wanted to talk a little bit about leadership, was so impactful. So this book, written by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin, they run a leadership company called Echelon Front, and they're two retired SEALs. They're awesome. And I had been introduced to this. Where did I hear? I think I started listening, like you just hear about Jocko, if you work out, if you're like in this world, like you kind of just hear about this guy, right? Actually, no. I heard about him. He was on Tim Ferriss, and this was actually like an interview. Like Tim wasn't even on. Like Tim was like, "Hey, like everybody likes you. Here's some questions. Can you answer them?" And I'm like just listening, and I was like deep into like a prep at this point. And I was like, "Damn, like this guy's serious. Like this is awesome." And I was like, "Who's Jocko?" So then I started looking, realizing that he had his own thing, and he had his books and all of this, and I was like, "Let me just check it out." And I was like, "Wow, this is awesome," because there's so many people who have great messages, but maybe you don't like resonate with how they say it or whatever, but I've always really resonated with how they say things, and it's very direct, it's very to the point, and it comes with a lot of experience. It's not just like, buy my business book because I have a business. Well, is your business selling business books, or is your business because you had a business, right? So for them, it's all very like real life. And so I started listening to some other stuff, and then checked that book out, and I was like, wow, this is awesome. And I've had the opportunity actually to get to know them a little bit, and they're just as awesome in person, which is really, really cool to me, because sometimes you never know, right? Like somebody can write the best book in the world, and then you meet them and they're like fucking dick. I'm like, oh cool. Like, and I always understand, you catch something on a bad day or whatever, but they're just awesome, and they're like the actual real deal. So it's really cool to know when you're reading something like they're not just writing this, they're actually living this. So I would say that book, really, it's called Extreme Ownership. It really, really kind of building on that like personal responsibility, like looking inward type mindset, was really impactful for me moving forward. At that point, I guess you could say it was kind of a pivotal point in my life, because I just finished grad school, and then I'd already had the business for a few years, but now I was like, all right, no more school. Like, this is it. Like, this is my real life now. So I think I started discovering, people like Peterson, people like Jocko in that time. And that was really a catalyst for me to be able to kind of step into this role as, all right, I'm a business owner. I need to be this personally responsible individual for myself and everyone around me.
Excellent. And we're definitely, as you kind of mentioned there, Laurin, that's something, just kind of going through your Instagram, your social media, that I mentioned before we hit record. I definitely want to come back, and we will cover pretty thoroughly kind of just like, how you've learned to lead and just all things leadership, especially within the coaching, fitness, kind of like bodybuilding arena. There's just a lot of, I don't know if you want to call it unprofessional or just, low level business, or I don't even know if you want to call it business, but there's just a lot of low level, practices going on within the fitness industry. So we're definitely going to get into that a little bit further in our conversation, because I too have read Extreme Ownership. I know Jocko, when I was living in Colorado as a physical education teacher, and I ordered some of Jocko Willink's kids books, his first one, which they're also just very, very well written. And again, coming from somebody who's lived life and lived experiences that 99.9% of us never have and never will. And that's just, I think that makes the writings of Jocko and his podcast and his content just that much more valuable and rich if you're open to it, right? So we will definitely come back to more of Jocko and what you've learned from him and all things leadership. Now, to wrap up the warm-up questions here, Laurin, again, if there's more than one, please feel free to share. But what is one piece of advice you would give your younger self?
A lot of things, but I would probably say I'm a very outgoing person. I'm very talkative. I'm very like out, just doing things, right? Like I'll be in your face, I'll be talking, but that sometimes can be a hindrance to possibly maybe either observing patterns, observing others' behaviors, like listening and learning that way, because I'm the person who like, I can go up to anybody and like pretty much like talk to them, ask them stuff. So it's not like I'm just I'm just talking for the sake of talking, but there's a lot of things you can learn by just like actually stepping back, right? And just kind of observing and listening and learning that way. So I think that being able to balance those two things was definitely a challenge for me earlier on. And it wasn't necessarily a challenge because I didn't know that it was a problem, right? Like it wasn't like it was like this huge issue, but now reflecting on my life, I was like, wow, I probably could have maybe like slow down for there a second and maybe really just detached and listened and learned that way. And I think that luckily I learned that early enough so I didn't get down this path where maybe I was like, developed this reputation of, oh my gosh, Laurin is like so rude and like interrupts everybody and like always is talking about it. Or like, I see people like that who are older and you're like, oof, like, don't want to look like that. Right. And so I think that again, at this pivotal point in my life where it really started to matter, I started to learn these things and like seek out this information and was like, oh, I need to maybe adjust. And for anybody else who's extroverted, it's just kind of how we are, like it's just really easy to like be outgoing and like be that person in the center of things. And that's not a bad thing. And I always tell people, like, even if you're introverted or extroverted, like you really need to work on like being able to talk to anybody about anything. And I think that's a really good skill to have, but it's also a good skill to be able to just step back and recognize like, when can you just observe? Sometimes it's like the nonverbal observations too, like there's a lot that can go into that. So I think that's just really important. And I definitely would have told my younger self that.
Very valuable. Yeah. That's something that just through the podcast for myself personally, because I'm definitely a talker and I can, what I call dominate a conversation. Right. And I always absolutely hated it when I was trying to talk and like somebody would cut me off. Right. And then at a point in my life, I realized like, wait a minute, like I do that all the time. Like somebody will be talking and like, I just have to get my words out and I'll cut them off. So I had to kind of go through this, a process of learning the importance and the value in listening. And the podcast, actually, this podcast was a huge, part of me basically being forced to listen to people. And when you listen, that's really when you learn, right? So I'm right with you. And that's super valuable, I think, advice for anybody that's listening to this podcast. And I think that's a great point, Laurin, that you brought up is like, hey, whether you're introverted or extroverted, like you need to maybe learn to challenge yourself, to get out of that comfort of whatever you maybe naturally are, right? Because there's growth. We all know, or most of us know, we should know through the uncomfortable. So that's excellent. Now that kind of wraps up the warm-up questions, Laurin. So at this point in our conversation, I really always enjoy kind of getting into the backstory of my guests because we are in large part today as adults who we were or the experiences we experienced when we were younger through childhood. So I kind of like to get a little bit of the backstory, the background of my guests. So if you don't mind sharing with myself and the 127 Fit podcast listeners, Laurin, where did you grow up? What did those younger years look like? Did you have siblings? Were you involved in sports? Any other extracurricular activities? Maybe just paint a little bit of a picture for us up to high school, and then we'll transition to post high school when we're done there.
Yeah, so I grew up in South Florida. I'm an only child. I rode horses competitively growing up. So that was a really large part of my childhood was, I went to school, but then I had like my whole different life, at the barn showing horses. I had my whole like barn family, that whole kind of a thing. And that was a pretty intensive, thing that we were doing. So I had a lot of very unique experiences that maybe other people didn't have. So a lot of times people will talk about like, oh, did you watch this show or were you on MySpace? I was like, no, like I was at the barn, like, like just very different. And so through that though, I did develop an eating disorder at a very young age. I would say that I kind of started restricting food and having, these more compulsive behaviors, like 8 to 10 was kind of like when I started. And then like kind of 10 to 13 was kind of the peak of it. So, eating less than I should have, not completely like not eating at all, but just, not eating much, exercising a lot, like hyper compulsive behaviors, et cetera, et cetera. And, eventually I did go and see a therapist. I went and saw a dietitian, got all of that taken care of because I was, labeled with anorexia. So you have to go through this whole process. And that actually was a really useful thing. Obviously at the time I was like, this sucks, I hate these people. Super emo teenager, but with enough black eyeliner to match my attitude, definitely. But I was like, oh wait, I'm like obsessed with food. Like somebody gets paid to talk to other people about their food, like that's pretty rad. So that did open my eyes to like what a dietitian was and could be. And then so I got to high school and I was always a very good student. I didn't necessarily know what I wanted to do. I'm just naturally like very good at like, if you're like, hey, here's a task, I'm like, okay, gonna do it well. But didn't really have like one direction I wanted to go. It's funny now I've like done all these degrees in science and I've actually took like the least amount of science classes possible in high school. Like I was just like science, like what? And so did well in high school, recovered from my eating disorder, but then was still riding and showing. And also, I was just like a chronic, not in a bad way actually, but I was always doing something. So then I joined track cross country, was very successful with that. We had a pretty good team. And so that was something that I loved. I actually started lifting weights at track when I was 16. So that was my intro to lifting weights. So, okay, I've learned that there's somebody who gets paid to talk about food. Then I learned, oh, there's this like lifting weights thing. This is really cool. And then I was like, meathead. So like totally sold on this. So we were literally doing like good mornings with like the barbell. Like, I mean, it was not like we were doing much, but started lifting. And then there was actually a weight training class that you could take at school. And it was like me and one other chick and like all these dudes. And I was like, I can work out during school. Like, yeah. And then I was like I like joined the Y. I was like taking spin classes, doing like, I was just crazy. I was always doing stuff. Right. And then, obviously I'm doing well in school, but it's like, well, what are we doing? Like, what am I doing? I pretty much applied to every Florida school and I decided on Florida State. And they actually had a dietetics program. So that's, what you have to do in order to be an RD. I thought, okay, well, that was cool. I'm still very into like exercising and eating healthy and all of this. So I can go to this program. So that was kind of what my trajectory was. And then after I graduated, like that first summer, I got my personal training certification. I started training a few people. I've been doing like kids stuff for like not kids training, but like kids like camps, like fitness camps and stuff. But then I started training some actual people. And then I was at this like super meathead gym. I always tell people about this on podcasts. Like it was like, and maybe it was different also in my mind because I was like 18, fresh out of high school, but it was like a very much a meathead culture gym, like old school machines. And it was like me and this like group of guys, like we'd meet at like 4:30, like very different people, very different backgrounds, very different goals. And we'd all meet and we would just literally just train for like a few hours, like total bros. And it was so fun. I like loved it. We had a great like group of people at that gym. And I was like, when I decided, I'm going to go to Florida State, I was like, oh, every gym will be like this. No, like not even like never once have I even replicated that since then, but it was a great time. And that was actually that summer was when I went to my first bodybuilding show and I got to see what figure competitors looked like. And I was like, well, this is cool. And so that's kind of all my story. Like your formative years do obviously put you in this trajectory of how you're going to grow up. So that's kind of how I ended up. And then here we are at college. So
Okay, so I want to touch on a couple of things, kind of just within those earlier years. Now, you mentioned that you were only child. In terms of your like parents and things like that, this isn't a psychology podcast, obviously, but our relationships with our parents or the people that raised us, that definitely shapes those younger years. But we obviously have our mom and our dad within us as well. So, a lot of who we are today is because of our parents and because, again, of those adults in those younger years. So, what was your relationship with your parents, and was there any other adults, up through high school that really played a pivotal role in kind of mentoring you or pouring into your life, Laurin?
Yeah, so my parents are great. I mean, I still have a great relationship with them now. They're very different in their own way, but they definitely taught me the value of hard work above everything else. You want this, you have to work for it. You get home from school, you do the hardest thing first, and then everything else comes afterwards. I think that part of being, owning horses and, showing them and taking care of them like that is a whole thing in and of itself. And there's different ways that you can have, barns and all this stuff. So it wasn't like I was there every morning at 3:00 to feed the horses. We had something to where it's called you board them and then that's, slightly taken care of. But there was so much responsibility that was involved with having a horse that I think that I just learned those lessons regardless of anybody telling me. I was just kind of doing them. Right. And that obviously trickled into my life as I, grew up. So I would say that the trainer at my farm was a great impact on me, of course. So she was probably one of my first other outside family, mentors. My grandma, I'm very close with my grandma. So she was, she lived in the same city as us. So she, picked her from school, basically helped raise me. My parents were, both working. So she was a great influence, still is. We're still very close. And then, my first trainer. And then I would say in high school, we had the one track coach was just a really, really big impact on us as far as, not just his coaching style, which was superior to some of the other coaches that I had, but he was just a great person and a great mentor too, and just, had some awesome lessons worked in there. So up through high school, I would say that was really, really impactful for me. And then when I did join that gym, I had, the one trainer kind of take me under his wing, hey, this is, you want to do this, you go get your certification, and then, I can help you. We can give you a few clients, we can do stuff. And, really kind of took that chance on me as this, 18-year-old girl, and was here, I'll, give you a few clients, we can work together and do all this stuff. And so I would say that all of those people were really, really formative for me. And yeah.
Cool. Now, one other thing I want to touch on is kind of the eating disorder, because there's so many, just because of the culture we live in. And I think even now, and correct me if I'm wrong, but because of social media, there's just the image, bodies, it's just all of that is just magnified. And again, I think most of us who are a little bit older that didn't grow up with social media, we realize that social media is literally just everybody's highlight reel, right? So I think there's just a magnification of images, everything, and these perfect bodies, or what people think are perfect bodies. And I train a lot of younger athletes, specifically females, and I don't know if any of them have eating disorders per se, but their eating habits are poor, to say the least, right? And it's something I'm always trying to stress with them. But as a guy that's just at the gym who trains them with weights and conditioning, it's kind of hard for me to really speak into their life a lot, just for the simple fact that they have their basketball coaches, their sports coaches, their parents that have a little bit more say than I do. But in regards to your eating disorder, kind of what if you can remember, what was like the beginning of it in terms of like, was it like, did you look in the mirror at some point and be like, I'm fat? Or did you hear girls talking about like, hey, that girl's fat or we're fat? And that kind of like was the catalyst for the eating disorder? Was it something else? What was the beginning of it? And then, you know, what was the kind of the mental process that you had to go through to break through the eating disorder and eventually overcome it? And then if you don't mind, just kind of like maybe share with some of the parents that might be listening to this episode of the podcast, Laurin, in terms of what they can be looking for in regards to maybe their younger athlete or you know, their child in terms of like maybe showing signs of an eating disorder. I know that's kind of a long-winded question. There's like 3 or 4 questions within that, but just kind of go with it the best that you can if you don't mind.
So when, you know, like I said, I was very young and I had a very, like I said, different kind of childhood. And I really honestly wasn't like looking like online at magazines. Like I wasn't in all that, like social media was not really a thing when I was that age. So it wasn't any kind of pressure. Nobody was ever like, you're fat. Like it wasn't like that. I was just always, you know, with my barn group, there was, you know, people who were a lot smaller than me, like literally petite. Like I'm not a petite person, you know what I mean? Like there was like petite people. There was also girls who were larger than me, right? But I was always like, oh, my friends are smaller than me. Like I don't know how that happened. Like nobody ever, to my recollection, nobody ever told me that. But I just kind of noticed like I'm bigger than them, like, and that was just kind of how it started. And then I remember one day like finding a tape measure and like, okay, well, where am I here? And then like, what happens if I like, you know, like eat less? And it was just very small. It was very small behaviors in the beginning. Like I, you know, just start to kind of eat less and less. And then it became, like I said, more of this like kind of compulsive behavior as far as like, okay, when I sit down, I have to have 2 water bottles before I drink. I'm going to like just eat very like small amounts of food. I'm going to like open the pantry and like look at all of like the calories and like everything and like see what's on there. And then I was doing, you know, got to the point where I was like, I'm not leaving the house if I don't do this many sit-ups, and like I want to like run all the time. And like I was just very like obsessive. And you know, I probably was still eating a normal amount. Like I mean, it was obviously low. It wasn't like I was never eating at all, but I was eating less than I should have, and I was exercising so much that I think that it just like my body was just like. And then when I was, you know, about to start puberty, like going through the whole, you know, going to get, you know, my menstrual cycle, and your body kind of just shifts. And I was like, whoa, time to double down. That was the first time that I recognized, like, it's again, to my memory, that I was like, I'm bigger than I want to, like this, I need to get like smaller. Again, what does that mean? But that was just what I thought. And then that's when I really got way skinnier. And that's when, I would say probably like that last year is like when then everybody started noticing, you know what I mean? Like sunken in eyes, like just really, really frail looking. And at that point, my grandfather had passed away, and my, you know, there was a lot that went all with that. Like, I just don't need to get into it, but a lot that went into that. And so my family was very, very busy, which is understandable, you know, but it was kind of like, you know, look, like pick your head up and you're like, whoa, what's going on? Like one of those kinds of things, like what's going on with Laurin. So I would say that honestly, just, and it is very different now. It's so different now. And I don't know if you've read Coddling to the American Mind. It's such a good book. Oh my gosh, you'd love it. You'd definitely check it out. Jonathan Haidt and George Luciano, I believe I'm saying that properly, but they're both professors, and at least Jonathan Haidt in particular, he's a moral psychologist. So he studies very interesting things in my opinion, in my estimation. But they were kind of some of the early people who were like, hey, things are very different, like 2013, 2014, like in college campuses, like there is a shift that's happening. We've never seen this before. And things are going to be very different. And now obviously we can see how very different society is. And a huge part of it is social media. So honestly, now I'm like, I feel like it would be so tough to even like figure out like where something is coming from with kids. But I would just kind of, you know, like normal parenting stuff, just keep an eye on like behaviors that seem to be like erratic, you know, And obviously kids and teenagers in particular are erratic people. So that's kind of hard to disseminate. But for me, it was kind of like this slow build, but then it was just like less and less and less. And then, physically you could see that I was really like, at some point it really deteriorated. But the initial stuff was really kind of small. So I would say, hopefully you have open communication with your kids. They can kind of tell you these things. But again, for me, it was so internalized that it was did a really good job at hiding it. So I would say that it was, I would just notice kind of patterns, see if anything really is changing. Obviously, if something is erratic and somebody is talking about, if somebody's verbalizing how much they hate their body or they look a certain way or somebody else is better, of course, that's, definitely room for conversation. Yeah, I wish I had better advice there, to be super honest, but it's kind of hard to go back and remember. Like, I really can't remember how I would have looked at that point, like not physically, but like as a person moving through space, like how would I have looked at my day to day to other people? Like, I really can't separate that at this point to give better like advice there. But it's tough, eating disorders are tough and they do kind of linger. The thing with that is that they don't just like go away, and obviously you can be, weight restored and you can be eating normally and all that. But typically the root of those issues will continue. And one thing, speaking of Peterson again, that was really interesting. So he did a lot of personality research, and one thing that he talked about was that I was like blown away. At least because it just really resonated with me. But he was talking about, I think we've all heard this. They say girls with eating disorders in particular have, are perfectionists. They have perfectionist problems. They're very type A, they're very whatever. And yes, that is true. But he said one of the things that they've noticed is that the particularly girls with this aren't just perfectionists, but they're also very, very conscientious, which is one of the big 5 personality traits that he talks about a lot that all psychologists talk about. But so conscientiousness is one of them. And then there's 2 parts to that. There's industriousness, which is kind of like more like work related. And then there's orderliness, which is very, order based. And people who have high orderliness are typically have high disgust levels. Like they have disgust for other people, and people who typically internalize disgust for themselves can have these eating disorders. And I was like, oh, I am like off the charts orderly and very conscientious, very orderly. And I do have this kind of high disgust sensitivity for things, and in particular, to myself. And I was just like, wow, like that makes a lot of sense, because it's not just a perfectionist thing. It's not just like, I want to be perfect or I want to be this. I always knew there was something deeper, but I couldn't really ever figure out what it was. And I think that's just what it is. And, everybody has predispositions to go a certain way in life. And that happened to be mine. And it is what it is. But it obviously led me in a lot of unique directions that I probably wouldn't have been exposed to otherwise. So I guess I am thankful for that. And it didn't harm me too bad. I mean, there's definitely obviously some lingering effects of that I'll never be able to, change. But there were a lot of positives, at least that I can take out of it at this point, that I can turn to positives.
Absolutely. And just speaking to that before we transition kind of further into your story, one of those positives, has it been obviously being a coach within the fitness space, and you yourself, which we're going to get into it here shortly, competing and working with competitors and things like that within the fitness industry. Have you found that your experience, kind of going back to Jocko's experiences and him being able to write that and speak that and share that with the world and how impactful it is, have you found that experience specifically, Laurin, in terms of the anorexia and struggling with the eating, have you found that to be very positive and helpful in regards to your coaching and being able to relate with people and helping other people kind of maybe break through or overcome some of their eating issues, so to speak?
100%. I mean, that is, one thing that, with coaching in general, I think that, being able to empathize is really useful, right? And now I'm not going to say that I have to have experienced everything my clients experience or vice versa. Sometimes clients experience things that I've never have or never will experience, but I can still, relate to them in some way. But definitely with the eating disorder or just disordered eating patterns, I do have obviously more of an awareness with that than maybe some other people who haven't had that. It is so common in our industry, unfortunately, but that's who is drawn towards, whether, especially if we're talking about competing. And I guess we can get into that. So when I first saw that first show after high school, I'm like, okay, cool. Like I want to do a show. Another really big mentor of mine was one of the trainers at the gym. She was actually an ex-bodybuilder. She was awesome. And I was, I saw the show and she was like, hey, you should do it. I'm like, what? She's like, yeah, you should do this. I'm like, okay. Sure. And Sunny was very, very German, very aggressive, like not like an aggressive, like not tone, but like stature, like you're like, okay, whatever Sunny says, I'll do it, like that kind of a thing. But she was awesome, like really great person in my life. And I went to Florida State for my first year. I came back and, I'd still been training the whole time. But it was totally different. And then they were like, hey, you have 8 weeks to do the show. And I was like, okay. And, at that point I was able to pull it together for an 8-week prep. And I mean, clearly it was not any, it was not the worst body up there by any means. But I still it was an 8-week prep and I was 19. Like how much muscle can you have as a fucking competitor, right? So in any case, I did my first show, but I was like, damn, like this was really cool, but I really need to obviously build on this. So I decided, I was like, I'm going to take 2 years off. School's getting crazy anyway, so let me just do that. So at this point, I actually started as a dietetics major. I did dietetics for 2 years at Florida State. And then as we were finishing up finals for my second year, I was just kind of like, I can't do this. There were some classes that were like a really huge turnoff to me. And honestly, at that point, I can't remember how I said I was like so fiery. Like I could never get tired. I just was, all crazy about it, which I don't know. Part of me is happy I didn't do it. Part of me, anyways. Switched to exercise science, was much more my jam, my kind of people, because the exercise science program at Florida State is awesome. If anybody is interested in going, I would highly check it out. Highly recommend it. They have a really large program, some really awesome people there. And I mean, the degree is no joke. The exercise science degree, I could have changed. I needed 2 other classes, then I could have applied to med school. So it was very science heavy. It was every science. So basically when I switched, I was like, hey mom, I'm thinking about switching my major. And she was like, cool. She's like, but you have to graduate on time. So as long as you can do that. And I was like, what? So I had to take all the bio 1, bio 2, chem 1, chem 2, biochem, physics 1, physics 2, everything, all the sciences, all the labs. I mean, it was on top of, all the metabolism classes, ex-phys classes, et cetera, et cetera. So it was like an onslaught of science for those years once I decided to switch, but I'm really, really happy that I did. I started helping out with research. There was a grad student who was running a project and I was able to help out with research. That was really, really cool. Kind of my first taste of what that looks like. And then I started competing again when I was 21. So in 2013 or so, I started competing again. And at this time I was still doing figure because that when I first started bikini, it was just starting and it was kind of like, I don't want to do that, when it first came out. I mean, it's totally different now. But so I started doing figure and I started, competing again and doing doing pretty well at the local level and then going to the national shows and, getting third call-ups because again, now I'm 21. Ooh, natural figure competitor, not really. I have a good frame. I honestly have a decent frame for it, but I would need so much more size in order for that frame to be filled out properly. And then, so I was, I kept competing 2013 to now 2014. And then I was at an event and someone was like, you should do bikini. And I'm like, no, I'm so jacked. I'm a figure. Look at me. I'm flexing. And then I just come back from junior nats and got third college and figure. And at that show, actually, everybody's like, hey, where's the bikini meeting? I'm like, bitch, you see these muscles? And I was like, I'm not jacked at all. Okay. And then I really looked at the girl who won, who actually was my height. And I was like, okay, I kind of look. So I was like, all right, got to pivot. That just wasn't my personality. Like figure is very like straightforward, like you have your poses, like get it done. Like that's what I also liked about it. Bikini is a totally different animal. But I was like, fuck it. I already had another show planned. So I was like, I'll just do this there's a local show. I'll go in it. I'll see how I do. And then kind of go from there. And I did the show and I actually tied for I almost got the overall. So I was like, oh, okay, did pretty good there. And then I went to one of the national shows and I got 5th. I was like, okay, I guess I'm already doing better here. This seems to be better. And then I did another show, and I actually got 3rd. And like top 2 was getting pro cards there. So I had to make that really tough decision that you make as an athlete. Okay, do I do what's best for my body, or do I do what's best for my like competitiveness? And at that point, I was kind of on obviously like a streak, and it probably wasn't the best thing for my body to push, but I did end up winning the overall at nationals in 2014 and earning my pro card. So it worked out. And that was obviously a huge catalyst for what I started to do next. So at this point, I'd started grad school, and then I'd already been coaching people. Back up. So in 2013, I started coaching people. One of my friends was like, "Hey, you want to coach me?" I was like, "Sure." like I have a coach. You want to coach? She's like, "Yeah, okay, I'll coach you." And then I was like her friend, and then it was a few people at the gym back home, and I was like, "Okay, got like a little thing going on." So I just had a few people, and then after I turned pro, Paul Ravella and Lane Norton, who were good friends of mine, they said, they were like, hey, you need to like make this legit. Like you need a business name, like you need an LLC. You just won, you're getting your master's, you just won the overall nationals. Like this is a really good time to do this. I was like, okay. And so, Team Loco Fit was born, like officially, like it had already been born in 2013, but now I had a real business. I made like a website on like GoDaddy, like it was like just some basic stuff, right? Like here's like basically like an online business card. And then started the masters, came up with my research design, and then did the research all through 2015, which was looking how different types of diet affect weight loss and weight regain. So we looked at a meal plan versus flexible dieting, and learned a ton from that. It was a really long study. It was like 22 weeks. It was a lot. Like it was a really, really intensive study. We actually just got it published a few weeks ago, so I'm very thrilled about that. So finally, all that work is done. And again, so going through all these things like competing. Now I'm pro, competing as a pro, in school, doing my research. And then like, by the time like I'm done with all of that in 2016, it was like, okay, now I'm going to keep competing. And now what do I do though? But like that year I'd already had a prep set up, so I didn't really have to think about it, because I was like, oh, okay, like school's over, but like I'm still prepping. So like, we're all good. Shit kind of hit the fan in 2017 when I was hurt. I was like really, really hurt, and I couldn't compete. I couldn't even really train or sleep. So I was just kind of like a mess. And then I had no school and none of that. And I was like, oh shit, like that was like a really big pivot for me. It was like, all right, this is real life. There's no school to fall back on. There's no competing to fall back on. Like, who am I? What am I doing? What is this business doing? And that's, I think, when everything kind of, like we talked about in the beginning, I kind of went down that journey of really, learning about personal responsibility and, kind of what I wanted to do and how to be a leader.
So now, what's that?
Sorry, that was a lot, but
no, that's it's perfect. I appreciate it. Now, in regards or in terms of, starting to compete yourself, kind of getting into that whole world, which, once you start competing, that's kind of like crossing a line, so to speak, right? In terms of like health and just a whole new world and experience, as opposed to just going to the gym and working out. Right. And so that, coupled with you begin to start, having a few clients and you're coaching and stuff. Now, how does kind of some of your past in regards to the eating disorder and things like that, how does that affect you or not affect you once you start competing and you really take that dive into, I know you're not competing in like the physique category, but once you start competing in physique competitions where you're literally standing on a stage in front of people and almost nothing, and you're showing off your body, right? How does the past eating disorder affect you or not affect you personally? And then how did that eating disorder and that experience when you were younger, how did those experiences then, and how still do they to this day help you to relate with some of your clients and kind of help them maybe with some of their issues or struggles?
So it was interesting. So when I told everybody like, hey, I'm going to be doing this bodybuilding thing, they're like, oh, you just want to like reignite your eating disorder, you know what I mean? Kind of a thing. And it was a very obvious, concern for most people. And I was like, no, like, listen, like I'm eating less, but I can't like starve myself because then I wouldn't have any muscle. Cause like, and that was true, I was like, it's not like, it's very different. So, my parents were like, what the fuck, crazy person. But I was like, listen, it's going to be okay. Like, I'm going to do it. Fine. And then I think when they saw it, and like everybody saw it, they were like, oh, okay. Like the process, like this is a little bit different, like not a little, very different. And I'll be really honest, like the early years of me competing, I didn't like my past with all of that really didn't affect me negatively whatsoever. And I never really like, I think I did a pretty good job. So growing up riding horses, it was all subjective. So the judging is subjective. So the judge didn't like your team, judge didn't like your horse, judge didn't like your saddle. Like that's how you, like, obviously you had to get the job done, but the little details like that did play a role, which plays a role to this day in all subjective sports are like that. And so I think that I had a background in subjective sports enough to know that my placing is obviously not just determined on just me. It's determined by all these other factors. And in particular with physique sports, I try to explain to people, it's not just about you. It's how you look against everybody else who's there. And you don't know who else is going to be there that day. You could be the only apple against the oranges, you know what I mean? And then that's going to could be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on what else is there. So it's just, I think that really helped kind of buffer me, because I wasn't like, oh, I'm standing up here basically naked and like everybody's judging me and I hate myself and I'm not going to, like, I didn't think like that. It was always competitive to me. Like I'm training to compete. And then where I think that it kind of turned more, maybe a little bit darker for me was as I continued to compete. So I kind of went on that rampage of like compete. And when you're young, your body doesn't care and you can do it. And then eventually it started to catch up to me and I was like, oh, this is what it like looks like when it's not working. You know what I mean? This is why I'm eating 50 carbs and doing cardio twice a day. Like, do you know what I mean? And now sometimes just got to do what you got to do. And that's where the athletic perspective comes in. Like if you are an athlete, you're doing this to be competitive, like sometimes you have to do that. But I was recognizing that I was doing that not because I needed to, but probably just because I wasn't taking time off. But where it had become a little bit more insidious for me was not necessarily like, oh, I'm doing this because I hate my body. I was doing this because it had become like me. Like that's what everybody knew me for. I was in school. So I was like, I was a, oh my God, a student, Jesus, I need to go back to school. I was a student and then I was a athlete. Like that's what I was doing. And then when I had that injury and I couldn't do it, that's really when it got highlighted, like, oh shit, like this is what I'm just always banking on. Like I'm banking on my next prep. I'm banking on, I need to do this for the business. I'm banking on, oh, well, I'll just prep it off, or what, if it is a body thing, like I'll just prep again. And I was going through these really big extremes. And that really literally forced me to not do much. And I had to kind of sit with that and learn through it. And so I did my last prep in 2018. It was a 9-month prep, did 5 shows. It was a lot. Of the 9, I was pretty much stage lean for the last 3. So that's like a lot of really negative adaptations on your body. And I emptied that like proverbial tank, kind of for maybe the last time, I don't know. But I got off there and I was like, all right, this, I'm good, and I told myself, no, I'm going to prep early next year. And I had all those thoughts. And then when I really sat with it, I was like, I don't want to be doing this anymore, you know, like, so I think and I think part of it was because I was holding on to it. Like, I have to compete for the business. And that's what it became, like, oh, I have to compete because I have to have this, not necessarily like an image of like what I just physically look like, but the image of like, oh, Laurin's a competitor. She coaches competitors. She does it, like, right. Do you see what I'm saying? And then it became that. And I was like, no, I can do other stuff. This doesn't have to be tied to that. And but it was scary because that's what it had been for, you know, mainly by accident. You know, it's not like I was trying to be that person. It just kind of was what it was. I didn't set out to be that exact person. It just is what it morphed into. And I said, okay, I need to, if I want to change, I have to make an actual change here with what I'm doing. And so, yeah, so that was my last prep. And, you know, I always like let people like really dramatically like retire. And I'm like, I might compete again. You know what I mean? Like I certainly could. I just, at this point, I don't have that desire. And, you know, I'm just really realistic with it, like where I'm at as a pro, like what my body can do from a competitive level. And for me, that's what it is. You know, like, it's like, I want to do well, or at least do better than my last time. So in order for me to get there, what would be required of me to do that, I just don't want to do that at this point. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. But I certainly, I'll definitely get back on stage, you know, maybe probably within the next few years. Like, I have a feeling that I will, but it'll just be very different this time. And I think that, you know, actually a lot of my clients had been, they were having this bet that, like, if we turn pro, you have to compete with us. And I was like, okay, or get all the pros together. But I actually was like, you know what, that would kind of be fun if we had a show where like, you know, we try to time it up where a bunch of the clients could all compete together. That would be something to where, like, you know, I would want to do that again, beat my last personal best look, and then just do it with all of them. And like, it'd be fun that way. And, you know, so that's kind of where I'm at with the competing, but it certainly helps. And I think, like I said, the more insidious nature of it was not necessarily the eating disorder past, but more of the kind of like, it became me, or I became it, essentially. And I think I see that happen a lot, which is what we've made a really big shift in our business with, like, just really focusing on like the mental side of things, whether it's like habits or like just mindset in general, and around food and around yourself. And I really see that is what is common with competitors who either compete back to back and then we're working through that, or people who just got like chewed up and spit out by the industry, and then they, like, you know, end up in our inbox. And I'm like, damn, like, this is rough. But that is what I feel like we are doing a really good job of trying to help those people, because it's not just a lost cause. And the answer is not just to prep again. The answer is not just to go back on stage if that is where you are having those issues. And I've been pretty vocal about this, or try to be pretty vocal about this, because I just think that, you know, a lot of people don't recognize it's not just about the body fat, and which is, you know, in and of itself, its own thing, like all the metabolic and the hormonal adaptations, like, yeah, that's the whole thing. But like, where your mindset is also is huge. So.
Excellent. Okay. So I really want to touch on and kind of get into the nitty gritty with you, Laurin, in terms of what you talked about. 2017, you had this injury, and then you said earlier that was kind of like maybe the catalyst to really get you to stop and, you know, kind of go a little bit deeper in terms of, like, you know, your identity, who you are, and what life's going to look like you moving forward. And I'm going to guess that some of this, you know, Jocko Willink and Jordan Peterson stuff, probably around that time frame, or maybe a little bit later, you know, those people, their content, those influences kind of maybe came to be in your life. But this is kind of like the part where, especially people in the fitness industry, people that, you know, compete, that coach and stuff like that, this is, if I can get to this point in a conversation with them, not everybody's, you know, quite as open. They're a little bit more closed off about certain things, but this is the point in the conversations where I really, you know, value this part. And I feel like this is the part where it's like, it's the reality. It's real life. It's behind the curtain. And I think this is where listeners really can gain a lot of value. So in terms of 2017, if you don't mind sharing, like, what was the injury? And then what was the process that you went through to kind of go through what I will call an awakening, and really finding your identity and who you were going to be moving forward, and what you were going to be moving forward, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So I actually had the injury in 2016 when I was prepping. So we still don't know exactly what it was, but it was some type of like glute tear issue. Let's leave it at that. Basically, I was leg pressing and I was doing a bunch of drop sets, and I like felt something, and I was like, oh, whatever. And I was really sore because I was prepping and really sore. Then I realized, only one side's really sore. I can't really move it as well. This is interesting. You know what I mean? Like, this isn't normal. But I was in the midst of my prep, and I had a bunch of shows lined up, and I already had the travel booked, and I couldn't back out. So I said, you know what? I'm going to train as like around this as much as I can. Obviously, it was kind of a big hindrance since I'm in the bikini division, but I'm going to do things that don't hurt, and try to limit everything else. And then by the end of, I did at the end of that was in September, and then my last show that season was in December. Everything was falling apart, like walking, just my feet, like everything was all fucked up because, obviously when one thing's hurt, everything kind of overcompensates. And that's actually what I think is why I was so fucked up for so long, was because of all the compensation patterns. It's not necessarily, as always, it's not always that one injury. Like, you break your femur. Okay, I see it. It's broken. I get surgery. I fix it. I rehab it. Simple. These kind of injuries are really complicated because it's not like one thing. And I also just can't rest forever because it's like a hip. But I had flared up hip pain for like years. Like, it was gnarly, and it still actually totally happened this weekend. I'm like, hey, what's going on? But so I'm somebody who is just very injury prone in general. But so that then basically it got to the point where like I'm like, I can't really move. It's hurting to sleep. Like, everything was bad. Finally broke down like 6 months later, got an MRI, and it kind of was like, yeah, you seemed like you had an injury here, but like there's a lot of fluid still, but like there's nothing we can really tell you. And I'm like, great, so glad I paid for that. But basically then that year was like, oh, all right, well, I'm, kind of, in this very depressed mood. I don't want to say I was clinically depressed, but I was very down. I had no school prospects, which I was so used to. I had no training prospects, not even competing, but like no training prospects, and just very like, shit, well, what am I going to do? Who am I? Right? Like that whole kind of question. So I would say that it wasn't like that year that I like just dug deep and I just was kind of opening my eyes to all this stuff. And I was like, for the first time, like really, really feeling sorry for myself for stuff. And I was like, damn, this is not me. Like, what am I going to do? And then I ended up, deciding like, okay, well, this is it. That's it. Diving all into the business. That's all I can do. Right. And, I'd never envisioned myself as a business owner. I'd never envisioned myself as a business-minded person. I used to say those things. I'm not a business person. I have a business. I'm not a business-minded person. And, because now for 6 years, I would just been like, so like science-minded and like school-minded. And it's just very, very different than, having the business. So I said, you know what? Well, better try to go all in on this, and started traveling a bunch more and like just doing more things, and really dove headfirst into that, while also trying to like learn different things. Because also, to be fair, in school, when you're in school, you don't have time to like do all this like exogenous learning. Like, you literally have to be like, school stuff, this is all that I can focus on, all I can think of. My brain capacity can only hold so much. So I have the opportunity now that I was graduated to like look into other avenues. I'm not going to be like reading Carl Jung while I'm like trying to do my master's thesis. Like, it's just not possible, right? Or at least for me, like that, I can only do so much. So we started to like dive into these other things as I had the time to, and then was really able to kind of start developing that. And so I said, okay, I'm going to travel more. I'm going to go to more client events. I'm going to go to more just events in general to be like visible. I'm going to try to like speak at more things. And I'd already started, doing some public speaking. I was like, I'm just going to go all in on this stuff, try to make all the connections I can, do all the things that I can. And, that's really kind of how everything started to shift. And, even when I did decide to prep in 2018, it still was different than it was before. It wasn't like out of like a habit, because that's kind of what it felt like before. Like, oh, gotta prep. It's new year, gotta prep. Like, this was, I want to do this kind of a thing. And then at the end of 2018 actually was when I was like, all right, I'm pretty much tapped out. Like, I'm tapped out as far as like how many people that I can work with. I'm tapped out with, if, you know, I can't grow any more than here. So I either need to hire somebody or or this is it, you know? And since, so in 2018, I hired my first, somebody to help with admin, and then my first coach shortly after, who she actually been one of my clients for a long time. And then she had moved to Tampa for the Masters, and the one that I did. And she was like, she made a post like, hey, gonna be taking on clients. And I was like, I was like, she'd be perfect. Like, there'd be no way that there couldn't be a better candidate right now. Like, she's here. She's been a client of mine. She's going to school. She wants to coach. You know, I didn't know this up until this point. So I was like, I'm very slow at making decisions, like molasses slow. But I was like, I gotta do this. Like, I can't let her start her own thing. You know what I mean? And then I was like, hey, you want to go to dinner? And then I was just like, so do you want to work for me? And that was kind of how it started. And since then, they were coming up now on, I guess, October, really 3 years with having a team, having the 3 coaches, and all of the changes that have happened with that. Like, that is a whole different, like, it's just so different. And it seems like, oh, that wouldn't be different at all, but it's very different. And the first 5 years just being on my own to now, almost 3 years with the team, it is uniquely different, but I love it and I wouldn't trade it. And ultimately, the whole goal is to be able to help more people with our methods. And that was the main reason. I wasn't able to do that just with me anymore. So I was like, all right, I need to expand how we can, you know, reach more people. And that's kind of where we were with that.
So how does, like, the success of your business correlate with your own personal growth and your own personal success?
Yeah. I mean, I would say that, so I'll be honest, things were pretty successful early on. Well, how do you define a success, right? I mean, that's different for everybody. I had things very small for a reason, right? I was like, I can only handle this many people. So because it was really, really small for a long time, I didn't really have to like worry about it necessarily, because I was trying to keep it small, you know? So in my mind, oh, we're successful because like I can only work with so many people, but you know, here we are. But I would say that success isn't just defined by like money or clients, in my opinion, right? Like, success is more defined by, obviously, those things. They are legitimate things. You can't ignore them as a business owner. But also, like, what are we teaching the clients, and like, how are they leading their lives after us? And it wasn't really until a few years ago that I was always learning more and changing methods and adjusting things, but I really started to like dive more into, and once I was done with competing, I was kind of able to do this, dive more really into the idea of like, what is our relationship with food like, and all the things that we're seeing, like, how does that affect us? So I talked briefly about my research. So when flexible dieting first started, or IFYM, it was like this huge pushback from clean eating and meal plans, right? So we saw this huge swing, and it was like, if you're doing this, like, you're an idiot, and if you're doing this, like, you're science-based and like you're evidence-based, and like, this rocks. And what I started to see was, kind of as things kind of came back to the center, was both sides have massive issues, but both sides actually mirror each other more than most people think. So when I was studying and I was looking at, into like the food psych kind of research, and they define restraint as two different, it's like a flexible restraint, a rigid restraint dichotomy. Well, flexible restraint sounded a lot like flexible dieting to me at the time when we were writing the study, right? And it can be, flexible dieting can sound a lot like flexible restraint. It's about moderation. It's about pre-planning. It's being less impulsive. It's better weight management, all of these things, versus rigid dieting, which is all or nothing, black and white thinking, and this paradoxical like weight gain over time, et cetera, et cetera. I think yo-yo dieting, those types of things. But I started to recognize that I was having clients who were just as rigid with tracking macros, and they couldn't do like anything outside of like tracking their food that they knew with their scale. And I again, like how we talked about in the beginning, like stepping back and recognizing patterns and like observing. And I started to see people, not only just my clients, but other people in the industry who were like this, right? Who were like really vocal about IFYM, but were not able to like eyeball or estimate a meal, right? And I was like, that's the whole point of this, right? And then I started recognizing that clients would be like, hey, just like, it's, go, it's your anniversary, like go have a day, like, yeah, go celebrate. And they'd like fall apart every time something came up where they couldn't adjust. And I was like, okay, something is here, you know what I mean? So started to recognize that there's just as many issues with flexible dieting, IFYM, as there are with meal plans. And they actually can be the same issue if they are applied through the rigid restraint model. So that was another huge pivot that we made. And I would say that the success now, again, we're not just defining this by like clients and money and all that, but like the success of like what we're teaching our clients and how we're teaching them and the methods that we're using to communicate with them have substantially increased, not only just with the amount of time that I've spent doing this, but also all the mistakes that I've made with people and all of the patterns that I maybe didn't recognize sooner. And it like kills me that I'm like, damn, I would have been able to notice that on like this client so much earlier, right? But that's part of learning. That's part of that is part of experience. Like you can know all of the information, but if you don't have the experience, it can be hard to see it. So that's why I think that it's really important for coaches, especially, to be able to detach, to be able to take that kind of step back and say, okay, what am I observing here? Is this just with this one client? Is this with multiple clients? Because if you start to observe patterns with different clients who have different goals and different backgrounds, you're kind of seeing the same thing over and over again. That is when you start to say, I need to make a change because what we're doing is not working. And once I started recognizing that and was able to implement those types of things and, really become a better communicator and a better leader, I was substantially a better coach because I was able to make more adjustments and I was able to not just be like, yeah, just follow your numbers. Like, oh, you didn't hit the plan this week. That's okay. Just get back on it. What the fuck's that useful for? That's not useful. Like it's better than me telling you that you're a piece of shit and that you suck. Yeah, that's better. But like, what are we doing to fix this? What? Okay, we weren't successful this week. What happened? Walk me through it. You know what I mean? I was really stressed. That's not an answer. What were you stressed about? Are there things that we can change? Was it because you got dumped, a bunch of, work at the end of the week? Or was it because you didn't train, your sleep was all scattered, you didn't prep your food, you didn't leave the house when you should, like two different situations. So like we need to be able to unpack these things. And that was just stuff that I wasn't doing when I first started coaching. And so I think part of it is just learning more as an individual on, leadership and communication and understanding people. But I think a big part of it too is just having that experience and being able to actually apply that experience to see kind of what is happening and intuitively almost just know where I need to make those changes.
Excellent. Okay. So just to kind of like head towards the finish line a little bit, as I mentioned earlier, I really want to talk about, and you just kind of alluded to it again, I really want to dive into and talk about the leadership side of coaching, specifically within the fitness industry. We all know about the football coaches, the basketball coaches, that type of coaching, which obviously there's going to be some overlap, some similarities, but there's just a lot of quote unquote coaches in the fitness industry that suck, that really don't know anything about anything. They're just basically repeating what they see somebody else on Instagram doing. So let's talk about leadership. So we've brought up Jocko Willink. So if you want to maybe just touch on a little bit more how he has influenced your leadership, what have you learned from him, and Echelon Front and maybe Jordan Peterson, tying all of those influences into your leadership learning. But I really just want you to bring out like your perspective in terms of what makes a great coach within the fitness industry. And there's going to be variables because we're all different individuals, right? There's different personality types and stuff like that. But generally speaking, and overall, Laurin, what makes a great coach within the fitness industry? And then kind of just like touching on like your own learning about leadership, and how have you had to shift in terms of how you lead your team specifically within your business?
Mm-hmm. So I would say first and foremost, there has to be a baseline level of competence. You can't get away from that. I don't care if you've been doing, like, experience is incredibly important, which we'll get to next, but you can have done something for 25 years, but not done it well, or not changed your methods, right? So basic level of competence that is relevant to the current time and new information is really, really important. So that is the foundation that everything is built off of. So whether that is, certifications or courses or degrees, those things are, attending webinars, seminars, it's like all of that stuff is incredibly important. Competence. So we have a lot of people out here who, this is like the lowest level, what I would consider coaching is like you said, they're just basically regurgitating what they saw or what their plan was. They don't really understand why they're doing it. And they can actually, harm people, because we are talking about people's bodies here. This is not just like some casual thing. And especially if we're talking about the competitive side and people are bringing drugs into the picture, like, fucking get out of here. Like, if you don't understand those things so thoroughly, you should not be prescribing them. It's just, it's a mess. So there's things like that. There's things, under the competence umbrella, I guess I would say, are just like basic business practices, like be on time if you're showing up in person, or answer somebody's email if you're working online. Like, those are things that we still hear now. Like, oh, I didn't hear from my coach for a week. And not because they were like, hey, I'm going to be out of touch for these weeks, apply, send me the, like, just complete, like, lack of communication. That is so unacceptable. Like, in my opinion, like, as a coach, you have like one job, if that is your job. And listen, if that's not your main job, if you're just like, hey, I only coach a few people on the side, that's also cool. You need to then be upfront and set that expectation. I only, I do updates on Thursdays and Fridays. That's it. If you don't send it to me Thursday or Friday, I will not be able to get to it till the next Thursday. If you set that expectation up front, now that's okay. That is okay that you waited a week. But if you're just like, yeah, send me an email, don't get back to somebody, not appropriate. So there's a few things that I think that kind of falls under just basic competence, you know what I mean? And of course, don't be a scumbag. That's a different story, but anyway, so that's where we need to start, competence. And then from there, I think that experience is absolutely essential. So the problem that I see with a lot, especially of the more evidence-based minded people, which, they have a lot of this competence, right? They have a lot of education, whether it's formal or informal, very, very intelligent, but they don't know how to apply it, and they don't know how to communicate to people. So you can have the best plan, like the best plan ever. You can't communicate it to a client. It doesn't matter. They don't understand how to utilize it or what to do when things come up. That's actually a really great thing that I learned. One of the things that I learned, and we'll kind of weave that in with, from Echelon Front and that team, was like, everybody on the team should be able to understand. And that's why I really like how they're I think everybody can really understand their lessons easily, because even if you don't know anything about the military, it's very complex, but the way that they explain it is easy, right? You have the head person, right, who's making all of these plans, but everybody should be able to understand it. Like, the frontline person should be able to understand it. So in this, like that example, like, if you're making this super complex plan that you think is optimal by evidence-based terms, that's great. But if your client doesn't understand it, or your client can't apply it because it doesn't work for them, why are you writing that? Like, why are you sticking to that so hard? So I think one of the main things that I learned as a coach was not just learning with experience, as far as like, oh, okay, like this, I see these patterns, this is probably what's going to happen, like, or like the pattern recognition, and how to change course and adapt easier, but also like recognizing that, like, my best plan is shit if it's not executed on. So we'll have this as like the tentative best plan, but then I have to have enough observation and intuition to see when somebody's not following it, to say, okay, hey, why is this not working? What do we need to change here? And sometimes it's a simple fix, like a tiny adjustment can make all the changes in the world, and then the client is totally adherent. And adherence is what is number one. It's most important. So if somebody can be adherent 100% of the time to an 80% plan, that's way better than 100% plan and they're doing it once every 4 days. So that's one of the biggest things that I learned as a coach, was saying, okay, not just like, hey, here's the plan. Yeah, you need to be on it. Like, here it is. It just wasn't as well-rounded. And this isn't giving into people's excuses. And I think a lot of times people hear this, like, that's just soft. You can call it soft. You can call it whatever you want. I don't really care. But ultimately, if a client is going to be able to adjust something and then move forward, and guess what? Then their 80% becomes like 85, and then it becomes 90. And that, right, like it goes up over time. I think it just really, really depends on the person. And of course, I'm all about like being straightforward and blunt. Like sometimes like, hey, you haven't been doing shit for a few weeks. Like that is totally acceptable as well. So I don't want people to hear this and be like, oh, of course you're just dancing around. No, like you do have to be direct with people. But you also have to recognize that there are different ways to achieve the same result. And that's, I think, something that I learned more with experience, was like, as I worked with more people with different bodies and different backgrounds and different goals, like, wow, we can really achieve a lot of stuff with, the meat of the program is the same, but the little details, that is so individualized between each person.
So in terms of bringing coaches onto your team or into your business, you kind of just outlined the basics or the foundations of a good coach or a great coach. But how do you kind of look out and say, you know what, I'm going to approach this person. I would really be interested in bringing them onto my team or our team. How do you, as the overseer of Team Loco Fit, how do you kind of approach bringing people onto your team? What do you really look for? Yes, I know you just outlined kind of these basics, but I'm sure at this point, because of how successful your business is, like it goes past just the basics. So what are you looking for? Who are you looking for? And then how do you, as the leader, step out and try to bring them into the fold?
So just by the way that it's unfolded over these past few years, I've always hired people who have worked with me as clients. So this is not certainly a prerequisite, but it has been really, really useful because they have been able to see things applied in that way. And there is a lot less of a learning curve there. You know what I'm saying? Because they already understand, they know what the check-in process looks like. They know, kind of what we've worked through and the methods that we've used and how we've adjusted. And if they have worked with me for a long time, they've seen those adjustments. They've saw the first check-in sheet to now, not the first one. Nobody's seen the first one that I'm still working with, but you know what I'm saying? Like they've seen that evolution, they've seen those changes. So that's been really, really useful. Also, again, not a prerequisite, but it's been certainly kind of like a nice little niche that I've created. Everybody does have an advanced degree in the field. So it is something that is, not required, but it is important for me that we do, again, have that baseline level of competence. Can I teach somebody that? Certainly. Could any of the other coaches teach them that? Certainly. But if I'm being honest, like what I'm looking at, like I'm looking for these types of things. And then mostly what I am looking for is somebody who, some type of experience in the field as well is also useful. So whether it is they've competed in a certain sport, or, a division, or they've, had some type of, background struggle, are they going to be able to relate to clients? And I can say very confidently, like every one of the coaches has had very different backgrounds, but they're their own in their own unique way. Right. So it's been cool because, they all have different, backgrounds, degrees, what they've struggled with, what they've competed in. Like there's a very wide range of people that we can help because of that. Right. And then lastly, I would say that being somebody who is very open to, communicating with people and getting to the bottom of stuff, right? Somebody who is just going to be like, hey, here's your plan. Okay, like cool, right? Like I need somebody who is going to have excellent communication skills, somebody who is going to have a deep care for their clients and the results that their clients are getting, and being able to stick through those really hard weeks. Because a lot of what we do is like very much like, I want to bang my head against the wall this week, or like, on both ends, right? And so I think that it's important to have somebody who has very specific skills that can be good for coaching and communicating. Like, yes, we all get frustrated, you know what I mean? But like, you can't be getting flustered every week because of, you know, something that happened. We need to be able to address it and, you know, move forward from it. Or is this client, you know, not a good fit, or, you know, whatever. And typically, I would also say to people who are just open to learning, right? So when you know, having a team that is willing to adapt to things, and like, hey, you know, we're going to change this, or, you know, what, you know, and that goes for me too. So that goes just as much for me as it goes for them. So like I said in the beginning, or at some point, I don't remember, I'm very, very slow to make decisions, very slow to make changes, which can be a huge hindrance. I'm more of a no person than a yes person, right? That's just how I am, which is good for a lot of extraneous bullshit, but is not useful sometimes when people actually have really good things that they're like, could we fucking try this? And I'm like, no, right. So there's been many times where I've had to do that, where I'm like, oh shit, like I'm holding us back because I'm not saying yes to us trying this, when it's really a low level thing to try. Like, it's not like we're like revamping everything and I'm like, yeah, let's go. Like, it's something small that I'm like, okay, let's do this. And we've seen some of the things where the coaches have brought that up to me, you know, certain examples, and I'm like, man, this was so great. Like, you know, and that's because we have open communication both ways, and we're all willing to listen and learn. And I think that was a really important thing for me. Also, was to learn how to not just be like, you know, if they come to me, the coaches come to me for questions, right? Or like a situation, I'm not just like, yeah, here's what to do. That's what I used to do. That's again, my first inclination, especially how we talk like dominating these conversations and whatever. Yeah, I know exactly what to do here. But now it's more like, okay, yeah, I see some of these things. What were you thinking about doing? And then they'll present a plan. And then I can probably just, if we need to tweak that plan a little bit, yeah, that's really good, but let's add this in or take that out. Okay, cool. That's giving them way more. They're developing their skills now much better, instead of me just being like, here's what to do. And then they're just repeating what I'm saying, and they're not really understanding either. So it's been this very interesting balance of dynamic between, like, you know, the leadership really is tough. It really is this dynamic process. And we have to always be like, sometimes we are at the forefront of things. Sometimes we're just kind of back, letting things, you know, play out. And one thing I really wanted to make sure with the coaches was that, you know, again, this is on me too. Like, I have to give them enough direction, but enough autonomy, because I want them to be, you know, their own people, and I don't want them to feel like they can't do anything. So that was what was really important. They, you know, picking people who had this baseline competence, from not only years of school, but their own experience and working with me. That was really important. But then building up our kind of interpersonal skills, to where not just between us, but between them and their clients, they felt successful, and they could actually handle that. So I think that that's really the next pivot that, you know, in this industry that we're going to see. We're already seeing it. I mean, it's not like we haven't, we're already seeing it, because, you know, most people, unless you, I don't know, it's most people and most goals are going to want to have somebody who is a good communicator, and not just like, hey, just follow my plan. I would say that maybe some competitors can kind of fall into that because they're just like so used to it. You know, the physique competition world has just kind of been brutal in that way, where people just expect that, but trying to change that.
Now, just to kind of wrap things up, Laurin, I want to touch on and have you share a little bit about mindset, because you've alluded to that. You've mentioned that, brought that up, you know, definitely several times, just as you're talking about your business and things like that. So how do you guys, for Team Loco Fit, how do you guys really start with mindset, or focus on mindset? How do you get this, you know, how do you bring this up to your clients, and how do you incorporate, you know, the importance of mindset with this entire process of, you know, training and eating and possibly competing, but really just, you know, making a transformation with your life?
Mm-hmm. So I think there's a few things. One, we really do have to address somebody's like relationship with food, right? Which is typically the crux of their like their struggles, which is why they've come to us, right? For most people, They're going to have some type of like battered relationship with food, which is why they've been yo-yo dieting for years, which is why they've been, doing all these competition preps. There's all these reasons why, right? So we want to get to a point where we're like, all right, somebody, like I can say, hey, go have these untracked meals, and like everything is like is good. But obviously most people don't start there, right? We're not just like, yeah, just go, especially when people who have been tracking so rigidly. So we see this a lot with clients who have either competed before or are competing, or clients who have lost a significant amount of weight with tracking. They're like they like cling on to it. And then obviously people who have any type of like maybe some disordered eating, they really like that control aspect of it. So we see this with a lot of people. Or they think that tracking is the best, but then they keep failing at it. So then they kind of keep going back and forth between like, I'm tracking, but I'm failing, I'm tracking. So we see this with so many people. It really encompasses almost every type of client. I rarely have a client who like doesn't have an issue with, and it's just the nature of kind of where we are as a society and types of clients that also we are attracting because of the message that we're putting out, right? So I would say that first and foremost, like having the ability to have that kind of flexible mindset, even if they are tracking or even if they're not. So if somebody first comes to us and they haven't been tracking at all, like we really just want to lay down like foundational habits for those clients. We're not necessarily saying like, yeah, let's just get right into tracking. We're really laying down some just like basic habits first, and then we might transition to tracking. For people who have been tracking, who maybe need to transition a little bit away from it, that's when we kind of incorporate, hey, these are the habits and the principles that should be like the bedrock of every day. Are we doing these things? Okay, yes. Why don't we have like just estimate dinners at home? Like we don't need to go anywhere, but just kind of like estimate. We don't want to weigh it. And then, hey, why don't you, just have an untracked meal completely, but have it at home? Then let's go out, let's go have a dinner, order what you would normally have, but just you're going to be out. And then eventually it builds up and it builds up. And we have clients who successfully now can literally lose, like are in deficits, who are still eating untracked meals. So it is totally possible to get back in touch like with all of that. And there obviously is regulation with a lot of things. And it sounds like really like frou-frou and like out there, but it's not. It's like most of the time you're weighing and you're measuring your meals. A few of the meals kind of eating similar, but you're not. Like that's what it is, right? Like it's nothing crazy, but that for a lot of clients, they can't get there or they can't make those substitutions. So if somebody's like, hey, you want to go to lunch? They're like, oh my God, no, I can't go to lunch. That's not going to fit my macros, which first of all, isn't that the whole point? Macros, like, right? Like we like lose touch of like what it was supposed to be about, teaching flexibility and being able to adapt. So I want clients to be able to, yeah, you want to go to that lunch, and you want to make the best choice that you can, but you shouldn't be like losing your mind over it. Likewise, I want you to feel confident in your choice to say no if you don't want to go, right? Like that's a different thing. Like if you don't want to go because it's not going to fit your goals like for that day, or you need to go train or something, don't go. You don't need to say yes to everything, but you also don't need to be like crippled with anxiety because somebody threw off your plan and then now you're going to binge for the rest of the day, which is something that's again really, really common. Because, and is this a food issue or is this another issue, right? Like that's kind of where it's like, where is that line? And oftentimes if we work through the food issues, they kind of resolve. But for some people, that is again why we do have therapists that, hey, if you need somebody, like we have someone, or just in general, I'm very, very open about that. Like, listen, I do want to work with you through this, but here's some other patterns that I'm observing that seem to be like not really food related that I would like you to see someone about. And then the other thing too that we really try to build up is stress resiliency. So kind of like flexible, kind of like dietary restraint. There's flexible and there's rigid. Stress, there's positive and negative stress, right? Like the way that people look at it. And in the literature, it's known as like stress is enhancing or stress is debilitating. And that's how they kind of define these things. So whether you have a positive or a negative stress perception really changes like everything. I mean, they've even done some research where it changes like your hormone secretion. It's pretty crazy like how intense this stuff is and how much your mindset really affects things. So a really great book that is a total, like was very eye-opening to me and for so many clients, it's called The Upside of Stress. I would highly, highly recommend it. And it really nicely documents the stress perception literature and kind of our misconceptions of it. Because we always hear, oh, stress is so bad for us. And it's like, that's not helping. That's the same thing as saying, you fell off your plan. No. stress is all around us. It always will be around us. So how can we actually adapt and handle this stress? That is what is important, right? It's not that the stress is here, it's going to be here. But oftentimes just building up that resiliency with clients in order to like work through those types of things, and then allow them to recognize maybe when they're going through some that like debilitating mindset where they kind of spiral down, like, no, as soon as that happens, we need to stop that behavior. We need to go do something else. We need to reflect on it, move forward. And I've had some clients who it's really, really cool because like over the years, you can see people really change. And one client in particular I'm thinking of, and she's made so many adjustments with that. You know, somebody who used to basically kind of just like fall apart with like the easiest things now is like rock solid and is able to handle stuff. And part of that is just life experience and all of that, right? But she's really applied these principles. And yeah, that book is incredible. I recommend it so much. And it is science heavy as far as like all the citations. So if you want to nerd out, you can, but it's also very easy to read. So in my opinion, she does a really good job of making it like a easy to understand book. It's not like, oh, this is science, like I can't read. Like it's very straightforward.
Awesome. All right. So the last question I like to ask all of my guests, Laurin, just to kind of wrap things up. What sets your soul on fire?
What sets my soul on fire? I'm not good with like impromptu questions like that. So I'm going to like be thinking about this like later, like, damn it, I should have said that.
Oh, you can send me an email and I can put the real answer in the show notes, right?
I'm good. Honestly, I would say that what we're doing right now, I really think is like hopefully going to change the industry. Like once everything up until this point is kind of accumulated in my life to help me recognize like where most people are at, right? And most people are really struggling again with this either actual yo-yo dieting or this yo-yo mindset or this like black and white thinking with, you know, how they feel about food and their relationship here. And that affects everything. While I know there are way bigger problems in the world, like certainly, but if everybody could have a better handle on things like their nutrition, their training, their sleep, their stress reception, if we had a better handle on this to like be better people, you're going to be able to positively impact everybody in your life, not just like, you know, mine to the clients. So that's why I think this work is so important. And I'm really trying to hopefully make a dent in the industry to say, okay, we're actually going to put a stop to this. And we're going to just not, you know, we're going to actually instill these positive behaviors and really just kind of shift the mindset from this all or nothing thinking when it comes to, you know, like I said, training, diet, lifestyle, to have something that is, you know, moving everybody in a positive direction so that they can positively influence everyone in their life.
So, do you have any, we had a very thorough conversation. We covered a lot of bases and that's what I appreciate that. I value that. And I love that. But are there any final words or final thoughts that you would kind of like to just share with the listeners? And then if there are, once you finish that up, Laurin, where can people find you? Where can people reach out to you? Where can people connect with you in terms of websites, social media? And if there's any sponsors, I know you also have your own podcast. So anything that you want to shout out or share with the listeners, please do that at this time.
Yeah, well, first, thank you again for having me on. I hope this discussion was useful for everybody. And I hope if you can take away at least one thing to really look inward and to really, you know, do that work to understand, you know, okay, maybe where am I not as good as I could be, right? And maybe, you know, everybody can have things that they can improve on. And also those negative things in your life, you can use as positive, like you can use that, you know, as your fuel. So hopefully some of the resources and, you know, the stories that I shared were helpful for that. As far as like coaching application, we do so much of that on our podcast. It's very, very coaching application heavy. So it's called the Team Loco Fit Roundtable. So it's on all podcast platforms. And then our website is teamlocofit.com. You can also find the podcast there. So you can just kind of learn more about us, check out coaching, apply for all that. We have a newsletter. You can subscribe to that, articles every week. And then social media for me is at Laurin Conlin, Laurin, and then at Team Loco Fit for the team page. And also I can send you the link for the research paper, if anybody's interested in just reading about that. And I'm hoping that sparks some more discussion amongst the research community. And hopefully we can get some more stuff done in that area.
Perfect. And I just want to say thank you, Laurin, for taking some time out of your full day to just chop it up with me, share your story, share some of your experiences, insights with the 127 Fit podcast listeners. I know I think we've been trying to do this. There's so much stuff going on. I think we've kind of gone back and forth several times, but thank you so much, seriously and sincerely, for taking some time to come on the podcast and share your story.
Yes. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. You're very welcome. 127 Fit podcast listeners, once again, I just want to thank you for your listening ears. They're always greatly appreciated. If you would like to find out more about the guests that I'm bringing onto the podcast or myself specifically, you can find all of that information on Instagram at 127 Fit. Facebook is Quentin Vars. If you guys would do me a huge favor and please leave a 5-star written review within the iTunes Apple podcast app specifically, that would be great. If you would also subscribe to the podcast, I would appreciate that. One other favor I'd ask of all of you listeners, as you have found great value in this episode of the 127 Fit podcast with Laurin, I would just ask that you would take this episode and share it on your Instagram stories, and then just make sure you tag at 127 Fit. That's how more people find the podcast, more people listen, and more people are positively impacted. If you think you would be a great guest, or if you have a friend or an acquaintance you think would be a great guest or guest for the 127 Fit podcast, please just give this email out or send an email to me and just share a little bit about yourself, and we'll take it from there. The email is 127fit@gmail.com. And per the usual, I will leave you with Proverbs 24:10, which states, if you faint in the day of adversity, your strength is small. This time, until next time, I'll catch you guys later.